Now, it's been a long week, although it's been a long week after week, in the horror which has unfolded, of course, since the 7th of October. What we know this week is there has been the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. Now, that's obviously the Israeli state, Mossad, will have done that, though they never claim responsibility. He was assassinated in Tehran. Israel has also said that Mohammed Daif, who was killed in a strike which killed huge numbers of Palestinian civilians last month, that he was killed. We have an escalation ongoing, of course, with Hezbollah, Lebanon, and we've had riots in Israel in support of the right to torture and, frankly, rape Palestinian detainees. There's quite a lot that's happened, and we've got a brilliant guest to talk about this with. We spoke earlier this year with the Israeli analyst Ori Goldberg. You all loved what he had to say. You were all very educated, as was I. So I thought it made sense to go and talk to Ori, not least because his specialism includes not just what's going on with Israel and Gaza, but the broader Middle East. So, Ori, great to speak to you again. How you doing?
As well as might be expected, Owen. That's a loaded question to ask somebody in the Middle East at the moment.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
It's always a pleasure, always an honor. Yes, as well as can be expected, I suppose probably is a better way of asking. Let's just start with the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, who is, of course, the political leader of Hamas. This was in the context of negotiations over a hostage deal, potentially, as well as negotiations between the main Palestinian factions, obviously Fatah and Hamas, over unity brokered by China. Extremely embarrassing, I would say, for the Iranian state. Assassinated by a remote-controlled bomb in Tehran whilst he was visiting after the newly elected Iranian president. So I just wondered, what's your thoughts on what's your thoughts basically what happened with this assassination?
Well, the principle you need to understand when it comes to assessing an assassination like this is dissociation. That is Israel's probably premier superpower. We are not capable of, or we're not interested in addressing reality as a whole at the moment, because reality as a whole is just a bit too complex, and it entails our claiming responsibility for the consequences of our actions. So what we do is we break reality up into smaller parts. And that means that Ismail Haniyeh, despite everything that you said, which is obviously correct, he was our partner in negotiations over the fate of the hostages. It seemed like there was a deal coming. The Palestinian factions under the auspices of China seem to be making progress towards at least a semblance of unity. So obviously we needed Ismail Haniyeh in place if we wanted all of these things to come to any kind of fruition. But Ismail Haniyeh is also a target. And he was declared a target long before, I think, the war in Gaza began, long before Israel's genocidal campaign began. But he was most certainly a target at this stage of the campaign because Israel has no more achievements, quote unquote achievements, it can claim as a ways of actually admitting that this genocide is at an end. Israel needs a victory image, and Israel has no victory image other than the dead bodies of Hamas leaders. So getting them, eliminating them, as we say here, performing targeted killings, all euphemisms for assassination, is the order of the day as far as the operational considerations are concerned. Okay, so we need Haniyeh as a political partner for political processes, but he's also a target, and our operational concerns are paramount because this is how Israel supposedly promises security to its people. So we don't care. Once Haniyeh is acquired as a target, once he can be assassinated, then the whole bit about how we need him politically becomes immediately irrelevant, and we assassinate him, which was how and why this happened. The fact that it happened right on the heels of the assassination of Hezbollah's military chief, Fuad Shukr, in Beirut, after Israel had been given warnings not to strike in Beirut, This was of no importance. We promised we would destroy Hamas and we would get all the leaders who had been responsible. It doesn't matter that Haniyeh was apparently not responsible for October 7th because that was hatched by Hamas leadership inside Gaza, and Haniyeh had been outside Gaza for years. He was a target. We could get him. This was a legitimate check sign in the win column. So we assassinated Haniyeh in Tehran. I think, again, the most important lesson we can learn from this is really how inherently broken, fragmented Israel's perception of reality is at the moment. We don't do strategy. It's all tactics in every arena.
Well, it's because a lot of people look at that and think, well, that's an attempt to just stop any ceasefire deal. Because I know you said actually there's this during the Vietnam War, there was that, I can't remember who said it, that the Americans should just declare victory and go home, and that was the way you should just extricate yourself from something you're not going to win. But in this case, I mean, by killing, someone said it was a bit like negotiating the Good Friday Agreement and then killing one of the Sinn Féin leaders, like Martin McGuinness at the time, for example. You don't do that if you want an actual deal. So what do you think? This is an attempt to just say for PR reasons, particularly for the US, for US public opinion, we want a ceasefire deal, but then you do everything you can to stop it. I mean, is that not what's going on? Or is it just you think actually it's the declare victory kind of?
Yeah, well, I'll see you and raise you. I think that there is interest in a ceasefire deal, but I think Netanyahu believes that the only way he can achieve a ceasefire deal is by declaring victory. And the only way he can declare victory is by presenting the Israeli public with the dead bodies of Hamas leaders. I actually think I have every reason to assume that we were as close to a deal as we have been throughout the duration of this campaign. Obviously, Netanyahu is not particularly interested in a deal, but seemed like Netanyahu was aware of the fact that Israel was vastly overextended militarily and that Gaza offered him no achievements whatsoever, that the next stage would be simply to begin a long-term occupation of Gaza, which is not something he wanted to do. I mean, Israel has been trawling for Hamas leaders for quite a while now. The assassination of Mohammed Def that killed more than 90 Palestinians and was described by Israeli authorities as a precise operation is a good example. Assassinating Haniyeh seems to me like an important part of this claim for victory, which was in turn supposed to ground, I guess, an Israeli agreement to a ceasefire. I don't think this is just obstructionism. I think this is complicated but very, very blatant politics.
That makes sense. Very interesting stuff there. I mean, in terms of what's going on more broadly, Lebanon, obviously we saw that strike, as you mentioned, Lebanon, and the kind of standoff that's been going on basically between Hezbollah and Israel. Of course, Hezbollah is not Hamas. They're actually, they've got huge amounts of rockets. There's been this kind of taunting, sending in drones without being detected to kind of go, look, we can go past the Iron Dome, that kind of thing. And obviously we saw that strike which killed 12 Druze kids, which is obviously hideous. What's your thoughts on what's going on there? In terms of the Israeli strategy, because it's a lot of people think that the argument seems to be, look, Hezbollah doesn't, within Lebanese society there isn't an appetite for war, and obviously Hezbollah has to be cognizant of that. And within Israeli society, well, Hezbollah is a entirely different kettle of fish. They can actually do huge damage. So actually, from the Israeli state's perspective, it's not actually an easy fight. So, what do you think? Is it just kind of this is going to carry on this brinkmanship for a long time, or do you think it could actually just detonate?
We need to start with the political conundrum, which was the fate of more than 100,000 Israeli citizens that were rapidly evacuated from the north part of Israel after October 7th on the false pretext that Hezbollah was planning a similar invasion and massacre. And the real problem that Israel has been contending with is how to get them to return to the north. And essentially, while an orderly diplomatic solution was on the table as an option, both Israeli authorities and the citizens of the north sort of understood that nothing would be achieved unless there was an actual war, in which Israel could assure that Hezbollah retreats from the international border 5 kilometers to the north beyond the Litani River. Okay, so that's the political conundrum. That's where it starts. And that is what drives Israeli strategy with regard to Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been adamant in its refusal to stop the tit for tat it has been conducting with Israel for 10 months now until the war in Gaza stops. I have to assume again, Israel's behavior following the Majid al-Shams attack, which I assume is connected to Hezbollah, but I assume it was carried out in error. I don't think Hezbollah meant to kill 12 Druze children. The Majid al-Shams football pitch was a staging area for the Israeli military as well. I think somebody made a mistake there. But Israel felt it needed to retaliate, and it retaliated the only way it knows how, and that is by assassinating senior personnel. That is Israel's MO. It has been its MO throughout this exchange of this lethal exchange of fire with Hezbollah over the last 9 months. And Israel assassinated the most senior Hezbollah leader it has so far. What is Israel's strategy? Israel doesn't really have a strategy. Israel wants to impress Hezbollah into stopping its fire. It doesn't want to start a war. It said so very overtly. The IDF spokesman, Rear Admiral Hagari, said this very directly. Israel doesn't want a war. Hezbollah has said it doesn't want a war. But this assassination was, again, Israel being habitual, doing the only thing it knows how to do. And this time it apparently went too far, not just because of the seniority of the assassinated leader, but because of the proximity to the assassination of Haniyeh, and lest we forget, to the bombing of the Yemeni port of Hodeidah in retaliation for the Houthi drone reaching Tel Aviv, exploding and killing a single Israeli. Again, remember the principle, dissociation. That's what we do. We're not capable and we're not interested in seeing reality as a whole. We break it up into small pieces. We attempt to douse each specific tactical fire. And what we did was what we had always warned ourselves against, which was unite all the fronts against us. What concerned us most on October 7th was that this would be a multi-front war. And acting separately, lethally, in each front, we made sure that these fronts would converge and understand there's an axis of resistance summit in Tehran. And Nasrallah is speaking as we are speaking. I suspect that there will be a coordinated response from the Iranians, Houthis, and Lebanese.
I mean, what do you think at the moment? What do you think the risks are of an all-out, I guess, conflagration? And do you think everything's a bit on hold, maybe because of the US presidential elections, and there's a bit of a holding pattern? What do you think?
I still think there won't be an all-out conflagration. And the reason I think that is because all of Israel's rivals at the moment have a lot to gain from not going all out, not initiating a war, and not even initiating a retaliation that would be powerful enough for Israel to consider as a casus belli, as a reason to begin a war. Iran and Hezbollah and the Houthis they all understand that Israel is at one of its weakest moments, and I think that's the only sound way to analyze Israeli behavior. Israel is dangerous and Israel is desperate because it's weak, because it failed abjectly in Gaza, because the hostages have not yet been returned, because Hezbollah seems capable of countermanding every Israeli move vis-a-vis Lebanon, and also because Israeli society domestically is, I don't know if I can say it's disintegrating, but the state of its resilience and solidarity and commitment is as low as it has ever been. And we can talk about that. But all of these reasons together make Israel extremely weak. And the calculus of power in the Middle East when it comes to Israel is that Israel's enemies are strong, the weaker Israel is. So right now, Iran, the Houthis, and Hezbollah, I would even go as far as saying, and I'm sure people in Washington or in London would disagree with me, but they're enjoying a kind of a moral advantage at the moment. Okay, which is of course ridiculous because Israel has been conducting a genocide for 10 months. But operationally, strategically, now all the people who are scholars of war might even agree that Hezbollah, Iran, and the Houthis have the advantage, and they will have the advantage as long as they manage to keep things under control. Israel is seen more and more, I think, as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Nobody wants to do business with us. Even the Starmer government is going to stop shipping arms to Israel.
Well, see about that.
Well, one hopes. But let's talk about, if even Keir Starmer is taken aback by Israeli behavior, it says a lot about Israeli behavior. And I don't think anybody's going to come out and say we're going to join the Iranians and Hezbollah and the Houthis. These are still considered to be, enemies of the West. But in terms of the potential liability, I think Israel is beginning more and more to be seen as a serious liability. So I think what now is being done in Washington, and I would assume that in London and Paris and Berlin as well, I think there are attempts to tell the Iranians to calm it down, right? To respond, but to respond in a measured way. And again, we've been here already. This is April 14th, was it? All over again. The Iranians were considered by the world within their rights to respond in an attack against Israel. I think they're considered within their rights to respond with an attack now as well. I think we'll see a strike. I think it'll be a measured strike. And I think the message the Iranians, the Houthis, and the Hezbollah will want to send to the world is, we are the grown-ups in the room at the moment, not Israel.
It's interesting, earlier this year, just to what you're talking about there, the author Vincent Bevins, he tweeted, in the final years of South African apartheid, the white government decided it must, 1, overthrow the government in Angola, 2, install a puppet regime in Namibia, 3, attack Zimbabwe, 4, attack Botswana, 5, attack Zambia in order to survive. This did not work. So, it's interesting looking at just the kind of scale of operation Israel's involved in, and that could actually look like strength superficially, but that's not true. And that's kind of partly what you're talking about, I suppose.
I think the analogy is very apt. I think it isn't just this government. Israelis would like to think that it's about this government. It isn't just this government. It's the paradigm that has shaped Israeli demeanor in the region is on the verge of complete bankruptcy. Right? It's becoming completely irrelevant. There's a sea change in the making, and I think it is starting now. These are things, again, that very few people can say directly, if any. The EU, I know for a fact, thinks that they've had enough of Israel. I know that in DC, many people are starting to see Israel as, at best, a hindrance and at worst, a serious liability in the region. China obviously has taken sides here and is siding with the Palestinians, has a long-standing alliance with the Iranians. So Israel doesn't really have a major ally anymore, and that is, of course, all Israel is doing. But yes, Israel is gradually being ostracized. People are backing away from commitments to Israel. Let's not forget, of course, the ICJ advisory opinion, which is huge. Events are so hectic that we seem to forget that opinion or sort of ignore it. But that opinion was huge. That opinion changed the entire way, the entire positioning of global public space with regard to Israel. Everything Israel had claimed was legal had been deemed officially illegal. There are no more negotiations on the legality of the occupation. The occupation is illegal. Israel's actions are illegal. That changes the entire equilibrium of the system. And in a way, Israel, I think, is also responding to that when it does the only thing it knows how to do, and that is use drones and grow gradually more and more crazy. But Israel is facing smart regional leaders. The Houthis are smart. Iranians are smart and beleaguered. The new president, who expected to be off to a moderate start, has to mollify his hardliners. But perhaps more than anybody, Hassan Nasrallah is smart. Hassan Nasrallah knows Israel very well, and he has borne the brunt of everything Israel can shoot at him, and he has survived to tell the tale. He carries, he's not very popular in Lebanon. Hezbollah is an oppressive religious organization, but as far as his authority goes, as his leadership goes, he has a lot of credit from a lot of people.
Let's talk about within Israeli society. We saw these extraordinary scenes of disorder after military police attempted to arrest about 11 Israeli soldiers after a Palestinian detainee had been, I'll just say, gang raped. His injury so severe he had to be hospitalized. Now, there have been reports of huge numbers of reports of torture and rape, which have even made it into the likes of the New York Times and CNN, in which, again, there had been quite graphic accounts, witness accounts of rape of Palestinian men and also women, as well as just various forms of cruel, inhuman, and degrading torture. In fact, the UN Human Rights Office this week published a report that says at least 53 Palestinian detainees are known to have died in Israeli military facilities and prisons since 7th of October. There are huge numbers who've been in detention without charge. We don't, many of them, they're guilty of being Palestinian. I mean, they're eventually, in some cases, released after having been tortured. Doctors have been tortured to death, clearly. The reason I talk about this is earlier this year, we obviously had the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor issue requests for arrest warrants. They detailed war crimes and crimes against humanity's charges against both Hamas and Israeli leaders. Torture was included in the requested charges against Hamas leaders, not Israeli leaders. Now, we saw these riots, basically, Israeli politicians and civilians basically joined an Israeli mutiny amongst the army to try and get them released. And then Israeli soldiers were questioned afterwards in the media, and they said that actually the judges and all the rest of it had basically said, we'll let you, you're heroes and all the rest of it. And the only reason this happened in the first place is because an external hospital raised the alarm, the doctors involved. So basically, I'm interested in what the hell happened. What is this, going on in Israeli society? People on the streets rioting in support of the right to rape. Debates in the Israeli Knesset about whether or not it's justifiable to sodomize using instruments a detainee. I mean, just extraordinary, how to say, to just watch. It's extraordinary to watch. That was a long summary, but there's a lot to pack in. What's your general thoughts on all that?
It's long. Your summary is short and succinct when you consider the horror of this whole incident. Look, even though that's how it sounded, I don't know if it's correct to define the debates in the Knesset about whether it's legitimate to rape Palestinian detainees. But that's not because Israel is united in understanding that it's not legitimate. It's the other way around. Despite what seemed like a January 6th moment, which was how it was presented by most Israelis who consider themselves on the Zionist left or part of the Israeli center, this outbreak of riots, this breaking into a fortified military prison and rioting near military courts and so on, I think this thing actually revealed how broad the consensus within Israeli society actually is. And again, this was portrayed by Israelis as proof of how Israel is torn on the inside, how there's a struggle, we like to call it the struggle between the state of Israel and the state of Judea. That is the state and the territories led by settlers and very Jewish, very religious, very oppressive. But of course, the state of Israel is secular and democratic and startup nation and so on. But that actually wasn't the case, because this was all about a single episode that was so egregious that it could no longer be kept under wraps. And there was also the issue of needing to demonstrate complementarity. That is,
Mhm.
Israel wanting to show the ICC that its legal system is capable of investigating suspicions of war crimes independently. So there's a lot of pressure on Israel that included, I think, very graphic threats about arresting Israeli leaders if they were to travel abroad. And, uh, and apparently this case of this Palestinian detainee came up, and that was seen as a way of showing the ICC that we're actually doing something about it. That we're sending military police to investigate, that we will apprehend and punish the ones who did it. But when that happened, the ones who did it, the prison guards, they started to fight the MPs who had come to get them. And as far as they were concerned, they were right. The reason they did this is because it had been conveyed to them very clearly that they could do whatever the hell they wanted to the Palestinian detainees and nobody would care. Okay, and they weren't specifically horrible people. The general sense in Israel, and this is in the broadest consensus you can imagine, is that Hamas, and particularly the Nukhba force, the elite force that was the military force that raided Israel on October 7th, before about 2,000 ordinary Gazans joined them, that these people were the worst, most horrible, most evil people in the world. That whatever we did to them could not be punishment enough. That we needed to deny them basic conditions, that we needed to imprison them in special prisons. Torture was too good for them. Right? And there was a broad consensus that this was true. Now, again, not everybody celebrated inhumane treatment of Palestinian detainees. There were a lot of people who just, ignored the issues or stayed mum. The torturance that they man has been documented for months. Okay? Everybody knows what happened there. Physicians who worked there wrote anonymous letters reporting having to perform amputations without anesthesia, for example. Everybody knew what was going on there. Everybody looked the other way because ultimately, effectively, everybody agreed that you could do this to Palestinians who had been involved in October 7th. Of course, nobody knows how many of the people in that camp were actually involved in October 7th, but that was the consensus. And what erupted in Israel over the last few days was not really a January 6th moment. It was a way for the Israeli elite who had condoned this, okay, who had looked the other way, who was okay with this being done, to find a scapegoat, to find a strong man to blame and say, it's just these fanatics. If we get rid of these fanatics, if we lock them up, everything will be okay. And in a way, that's the dynamic of the protests against the Netanyahu government that took place for about a year before October 7th and that have resumed recently. The protests are not about the genocide. The protests
Yeah.
are not about torture. The protests are about who's in charge, who gets to decide who counts as a real, true patriot and who doesn't. Okay, and it's a struggle between an old, entrenched elite and the upstarts who want to topple that elite. But it's a completely in-house struggle, and perhaps the most, I think, important thing you need to understand is that neither side gives a fig about the Palestinians. Neither side cares. Nobody cares what's being done to the Palestinians. Nobody cares. I mean, take the assassination of Death, for example. Okay, that killed more than 90 and was really, I mean, Israel used several 2,000-pound bombs in order to assassinate Deif. Again, this was described as a precise operation based on precise intelligence today by Israeli media. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. I read over the last few days. I've been reading. I thought this had been over and done with, but I've been reading again. People I know to be serious, smart, educated, who have been saying things like the difference between Israel and Iran. This is while we're waiting for the Iranian retaliation. Is that Iran will shamelessly target civilians, whereas Israel only goes after senior leaders. I swear to God, this is not a solitary statement. People actually said this. So the thing that I come away with is this understanding and these events at Stetiman and at the military courts only reinforce that this is about looking good. This is about feeling good about yourself, but this is about keeping the debate exclusively within Israel about Israelis. The Palestinians are simply not there. We don't care. We don't necessarily want to kill them. There are people who feel they deserve abuse. Yes, they are at one end of the spectrum. But at the other end of the spectrum are people who say, no, this whole thing is repulsive. But of course we have to keep them in concentration camp conditions. What else are you going to do? And ultimately, this all adds up to a broad consensus that simply dehumanizes the Palestinians in the most extreme ways I can think of. And that is still Israel at the moment, despite the failures in Gaza, despite the impending regional war, despite the implosion of every semblance of strategy Israel seemed to have. That is still Israel at this moment.
It's interesting. There was a tweet by, you must have seen it, the Israeli analyst, not a wise Israeli analyst like yourself, called Joel Ben Afraim, who had previously supported the mistreatment of detainees, who said, I feel stupid and ashamed. In May, an expose came out on CNN detailing the abuses in stay time, and then the New York Times released their own article on it. Both were backed up with Israeli sources crossed with Palestinian ones. I dismissed them because my government sources, Israeli media, denied them. My whole life I was told the international media was out to get Israel, that they were all anti-Semites. But today I realized I was lied to, how much I was lied to by my country, by my friends, by my media. And then it goes, and the worst part, he says, it's only coming out not because the government have changed their hearts, it's because of pressure, not least he says from the ICC and the ICJ. But he said the truth that Israel is routinely torturing inmates. The sexual abuse is very common, that people are being tortured to death. Worst of all, many of the people in this facility were innocent, rounded by accident. Yeah, I mean, it's just quite interesting hearing that. It's probably quite, I don't know. I mean, it's always interesting when people, you know, who he would have been for the last few months angrily decrying anyone who said the truth. And now he's finally realised the truth. I know that's quite a rare, but it's still quite a useful piece of evidence.
Yeah, you know, I'm certainly for him. You know, I support him in his quest to find the truth. But it takes a very conscious, willful act of denial to not see what's happening, and it's not even. I can't explain this statement that I quoted to you before about how Iran targets civilians while Israel targets leaders. You know, maybe in early November, I would have understood, maybe, even though I thought the blanket bombings were a horrid crime beginning on October 8th, or I knew where they would go. But I could have understood the rage. I could have understood the humiliation. But after 10 months, tens of thousands of women and children and civilians in Gaza dead. After 10 months, you could really, you know, tweet that in good faith. That, I think, that shows precisely that our dehumanization of the Palestinians was so severe, was so all-engrossing, that we had in the process dehumanized ourselves. You know, we're not capable of seeing this. I don't think these people were lying. I don't think they were posturing.
Mm-hmm.
These people wrote in Hebrew. It wasn't for Hasbara purposes, but in the Israeli collective mind, everything that is done to Hamas is you know, proper and justified,
Mm-hmm.
and all responsibility for all civilian deaths in Gaza is exclusively on Hamas's shoulders, because it uses civilians as human shields, because it hides among civilians, and because, this is another argument you hear here quite quickly, quite often, I'm sorry, not quickly, is Hamas could have stopped this whole thing in 10 minutes. All they had to do was give themselves up and return the hostages, and Israel would have stopped. Which, of course, in no way fits reality, with Israel employing very sophisticated AI systems and algorithms to detect tens of thousands of Hamas targets, because Israel's declared goal for this war was the destruction of Hamas. After a few months where it became very clear that Hamas was not going to be destroyed, its destruction became the destruction of Hamas as a capable military and governing force. Even that didn't happen. So now Israel has resorted, and this has been the case for weeks now, Israel has resorted to hopefully, bombing extensively enough to kill senior Hamas leaders. I don't know if it worked with Deif or not. There's no way of knowing if Israel is telling the truth. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Israel attempted to assassinate Deif in an area that was full of displaced persons it had sent there because it had designated the area as a safe zone. And the notion that if Deif was there, it was okay to kill as many Palestinians as possible. I've had these conversations, where people said to me, if Hitler had surrounded himself in the bunker with 90 Jews, would you have not killed Hitler then? That's the sort of counter argument you hear here. But none of this registers in the collective Israeli consciousness. None of it. The Palestinians are simply not there. We don't care.
Just finally, actually, it's not a complete segue. Can you just mention Hitler, given the content of this tweet, which I was genuinely shocked by, and lots of people shocked by, and he deleted it. The former spokesperson, one of the spokespeople of the Israeli Prime Minister and government, Elon Levy, tweeted yesterday, "Not your grandparents' Jews anymore." Yep. Whoa! I would say when I saw that, I was like, "Wow!" I mean, literally suggesting that those who had perished in the Shoah were weak. We're not like them. They were weak. We stand up for ourselves. We fight. I don't know. What do you say to that?
A lot of Israelis were very angry with that tweet. But again, remember the beginning of our conversation. Dissociation. We're very angry with Elon Levy. We can place him. He was Netanyahu's advisor. He was let go by the Netanyahu family for whatever reasons. But he still does hasbara. So we look at him, we read what he says, and we say, oh my God, that's so offensive. It's offensive to us. A lot of Israelis responded in Hebrew, dude, my grandparents survived the Holocaust, came here, built a life for themselves. What the hell are you talking about? So on the one hand, we're very angry. On the other hand, we sort of get it, I guess. None of us, very few of us are happy about the assassinations. You may have seen people handing out sweets. Those are directed photo ops. Very few Israelis woke up in the morning and felt safe when they had heard Haniyeh was assassinated. We know what the implications are. We know what the consequences of our actions are, but we seem to be resigned to our fate. We seem to think there's nothing we can do, And again, finally, we've got a unity between the Prime Minister and the IDF high brass, because here we've got a successful operation. Everybody needed to cooperate to mount a successful operation like that. And again, nobody's happy. If anybody has the notion that Israelis are walking around feeling triumphant, they really aren't. There's a sense of impending doom, but again, not because we did anything. We did what we had to do. And anything that happens would have happened anyway, because we're not responsible for any of it. Because for 10 months, we've been telling ourselves we're not responsible for what's happening in Gaza. And, the way grandmothers used to talk about wiping the frown off your face because otherwise it'll stick. We've convinced ourselves we're not responsible. We're not responsible for anything. We do our best, we try. We're not great at it. Obviously, things are going to hell in a handbasket. But it isn't us. Not because it's them, just because we're not responsible. And the other side of that, when it comes to the Palestinians, is that we don't care. Those are two sides of the same coin. We're not responsible strategically. We don't care when it comes to the Palestinians. We're zombies. We're not really here. We're hollow. We're not even full of murderous intent. We're not particularly, we're not celebrating all this death. We don't like it, most of us. But we're not really here. Okay? That's the vibe in Israel right now.
Sounds like kind of mass ketamine disassociation.
Yeah.
A slightly surreal segue for me there, but Ori, that was brilliant stuff. Always insightful, always thoughtful, always makes me think. I mean, when I spoke to you last time, it made me think about things in a different way, which is always brilliant when you speak to someone. So those who are watching, please share this video, press like, leave your comments, makes a bit more people watch it, subscribe. But Ori, thank you so much. It was always an honor.
Thank you for having me, Owen. It's an honor for me as well.
Bless you.